The boot prints came out of nowhere, and in that country nothing came out of nowhere. Emmett Hale had been walking the high line above the spring pasture the way he did every third morning, checking where the water was running and where it wasn't. The ground was hard and dry, and the prints should not have been there at all, and that was the first wrong thing about them. They were small. A woman's boots or a girl's, worn down at the heel and set deep, the way you step when you are carrying something heavy and have been walking a long time with nowhere left to walk to. He stood over them a long moment and did not touch them, because a man who reads water learns early not to put his hands on a thing before he understands it. He looked the way they had come from, the timberline, and the way they went, toward his house a mile off. Then he followed them because there was nothing else to do with them. He was a man the town of Pronghorn Flats had decided, years ago, was not much of anything. A quiet man who would rather stand in the sun and watch a fence line than argue with a banker. "That's Emmett," they'd say, and shrug, and go back to their business. "Before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, your town, your country, whatever's on the stove behind you." I read every one. And there's something about knowing there's a light on in a kitchen somewhere that makes a story like this feel like it's being told around a table. Now, where was I? He had been married to a woman named Lena for 22 years, and when she died of the fever 3 winters back, the town had patted his shoulder and said he'd manage, and he had managed. The prince led him to the draw where the old line shack stood, the one with the roof half in and the door hanging by a single hinge, and that was where he found her. She was not lying down, which surprised him. She sat with her back against the shack wall in the shade, knees drawn up and arms around them, watching him the way a caught thing watches a thing coming closer. Her dress was the color of good church cloth, a deep blue, torn at the shoulder and stained at the hem with mud and with something that might have been blood, though not much of it. Her hair had come loose, dark and tangled. Her face was young and thin, and her eyes were the thing he remembered afterward. The eyes of somebody who had stopped hoping a while ago and had only just started again, and did not trust it. He stopped 10 feet from her because you do not crowd a caught thing, and he took off his hat and he said, "Ma'am." She did not answer. She watched him. "I got water in the shack," he said. "It's old, but it's wet." She looked at the shack, then back at him, measuring him the way any woman who has been taught to be afraid measures a strange man. He stood very still and let her. "You've been walking," he said. She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was dry and small. 3 days, she said. "Maybe 4. I lost count." "From where?" She did not answer that. Then, in a voice so small it almost did not reach him, she said the words that were going to change everything he understood about his life, though he could not know it yet. "Don't let them find me." He did not ask who them was. He had been alive long enough to know that a question like that, asked too soon, closes a door that does not open again. He said, "All right," and that was the second wrong thing about the morning, and the first lie Emmett Hale had told in 11 years, because he had not meant "all right, I will hear you." He had meant "all right, I will help you," and he knew it, and he said it anyway, and the weight of it settled into him like a stone dropped into still water. He helped her up the hill to the house. She leaned on him more than she wanted to, and he let her, and he did not talk. The house was a low, square thing of board and batten, set in the middle of its own quiet, the barn behind it, the corral, the windmill ticking over the well. When Lena died he had gone on doing the work because the work was there, and it had filled the days and the years, and somewhere in all of it he had become the man the town thought he was. He put her in the spare room, which had been Lena's sewing room and still smelled faintly of her, of wool and of the lavender she had hung to dry and he had never taken down. He heated water and brought her a clean shirt of his own. She took it without a word and shut the door, and he stood in the passage and listened to her move around in there, and he thought about the direction they had come from, and the only thing in that country that had a reason to hunt a woman through the timber. Garrick Vane's spread ran the whole south edge of the valley, 40,000 acres of the best grass in the county, and he had been buying the valley's troubles for 20 years, its debts, its foreclosed notes, its daughters. He did it with a smile and with patience, so slowly nobody could point to the moment it happened, and he was the richest man in Pronghorn Flats and the most feared, and the sheriff, Tabor, was his cousin by marriage and his creature by habit. Emmett stood in the passage and thought about the only direction a woman running from Garrick Vane could have come from. "She's his," he thought. "She got away, and he will come for her." And he thought of the word all right and the weight of it, and he did not take it back. That night, while she slept, he walked the fence line in the dark and found where the search party had been. 3 riders and a man on a big bay horse. They had come close, turned, and gone on, and they would be back. He stood in the dark and listened to the wind, and he understood, for the first time in 3 years, that he was not done with needing people. He was only just starting. She came out of the spare room at first light, wearing his shirt and her own skirt, her hair braided back, and she looked at him the way a person looks at a door they are not sure will open. He had coffee on, and he poured her a cup without asking, and she took it and stood at the window with her back to the room, and for a long time neither of them said anything. "You want to know my name?" she said finally. It was not a question. "If you want to tell me." Willa Carden. She said it like a person testing whether the name still fit her. "And I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're wondering. I'm running from a man who thinks he owns me." He did not ask who. He had already worked it out, and he had spent the night walking the fence line in the dark, and he had come back in with the weight of it on him. But he let her tell it because a person who has been made small needs to be allowed to speak in her own time. Her father, she said, had borrowed against the farm to buy seed the year the river took the bottom field. And the note had passed, the way such notes always passed, into the hands of Garrick Vane. When her father died, Vane had come to the funeral and told her, kindly, that the debt was hers now, and that she could work it off at his ranch, and that there was no shame in honest work. She had believed him. She had been 17. He had not touched her, not the way people whispered. That was the careful part of him. He had simply made her small, day by day, until she was a thing that moved through his house without a voice, until she had signed the papers he put in front of her without reading them, because reading them had stopped mattering. The papers, she had learned later, made her his ward, made her the legal keeper of his household, made her, in the eyes of the county, a girl who belonged to him. "He told me," she said, still not turning around, "that when I was ready we'd marry, and the debt would be gone and I'd be taken care of. And he said it like it was a kindness." Emmett watched the back of her head and did not speak. "The worst part wasn't the fear," she said. "It was getting used to it." He let that sit in the room for a while. Then he said, "You'll stay here. Nobody comes up this road but me." She turned then and looked at him, and he saw that she was trying to decide whether to believe him, and he understood that she had been deciding that about people for a long time and had mostly stopped. "You don't know me," she said. "I know you've been walking 3 days in boots that don't fit," he said. "I know you didn't steal from me when you could have. I know you're scared, and you're still standing. That's enough to start on." That was the choice, and he made it in that kitchen, and he knew the cost of it because he knew exactly what Vane held. Emmett's own land was clear. His father had left it to him free, but the water rights on the south pasture ran through Vane's fence, and Vane had been patient about that for years, the way he was patient about everything, and Emmett knew that hiding his ward would hand Vane the excuse he had been waiting for. For 3 days nothing happened. He told no one. He moved her things into the root cellar when he was gone from the house, and she stayed quiet as a caught thing, and he went to town on the 4th day to buy flour and salt and a length of cloth, and that was where the trouble found him. Mabel Trask ran the dry goods, a widow with a way of counting your change twice and looking at you sideways while she did it, and she watched him buy the cloth and the flour and the coffee, and she said, "That's a lot of coffee for one man, Emmett." "Company coming," he said. "Is that so?" She folded the cloth and did not look at him, which was her way of looking at him hardest. "Well, you tell your company I got more of this cloth in the back, and it's not going anywhere." He carried the sack out to the wagon and found Sheriff Tabor standing by the wheel, rolling a cigarette, not looking at him. "Emmett," Tabor said. "Sheriff. Heard you had company up at your place. Woman, they say. Stranger. News travels." "It does." Tabor lit the cigarette and squinted at the mountains. "Man's got a right to company. But there's a man down at the Vane place looking for a woman, and he's got papers say she belongs to him, and he's asking around quiet the way he does. And I'd hate to see a good man like you get tangled up in something that ain't his. I'll keep it in mind." Tabor nodded and walked off, and Emmett stood by the wagon and watched him go, and he understood that the sheriff had just done him a kindness and a warning in the same breath, and that the kindness would not survive a direct order. That night he told Willa about Tabor, and she went very still, and then she said, "You should let me go." I'll take the road east and I'll be gone by morning. You'd be found by noon, he said. There's nowhere in this valley he doesn't watch. Then what do you want me to do? Stay here and wait for him to come take me? I want you to stay here, Emmett said, and I want you to trust that I'm better at hiding things than he is at finding them. She looked at him a long time. Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. He thought about it because it deserved a true answer, and he said, because I've spent 11 years being the man people decided I was. And I'm tired of it. That was the end of the quiet. The next morning, from the kitchen window, he saw the dust of a rider coming up the long road, unhurried, the way a man rides when he owns the road, and he knew before the horse came into focus that it was Garrick Vane, and that the choice he had made in his kitchen was about to be tested into the open. So tell me, from wherever you're listening tonight, what would you do? Standing in your own kitchen, watching the man who holds every card in the valley ride up your road to take back the woman you've promised to protect? That's the question this story is really asking, the one I want you to hold on to. Because most of us never get to find out what we're made of until the dust shows up on the road. Vane dismounted without hurrying, hat in hand, the picture of a neighbor come calling. A big man gone soft at the middle. Emmett, he said, warm as a handshake. It's been a while. Garrick. Vane looked around the yard, at the windmill, at the barn, at the house. I hear you got company. A woman. Young, dark-haired. Wearing a blue dress. Emmett did not look at the house. He had learned from the ground that you never look at the thing you're hiding, because that's where the eye goes. I don't know anything about that. Now, Emmett. Vane shook his head, sad as a preacher. I'm not here to make trouble. That woman is my ward. I took her in when her daddy died, gave her a roof, gave her work. And she run off, and I just want her back safe. That's all. I understand what you're saying, Emmett said. I'm telling you I don't know anything about it. Vane studied him a long moment, and Emmett stood in the yard and let himself be studied, and he did not blink. Well, Vane said finally and smiled, and put his hat on. If you happen to see her, you tell her I'm not angry. Tell her there's a place for her at the ranch, and it's still waiting. And Emmett, I'd hate for anything to happen to this place of yours. He looked up at the windmill, at the water rights that ran through his fence. It's a good place. It'd be a shame to see it dry up. He rode out the way he had come, unhurried, and Emmett stood in the yard until the dust settled, then went inside and found Willa in the passage, white as the flower he'd bought. He knows, she said. He suspects, Emmett said. There's a difference, and it's the only difference that matters. But he was wrong, and he found that out that night because Vane did not wait. He came back before moonrise with Sheriff Tabor and 3 men. They walked the yard, opened the barn, walked the house, and Emmett stood in the kitchen and let them, and Willa was in the root cellar under the floor of the pantry, and under their boots he could hear nothing at all. Tabor came back into the kitchen with the lamp. Nothing, he said. No sign of her. Vane stood in the doorway and looked at Emmett, and the room was very still. You're lying to me, Vane said quietly. I can always tell. I've been lied to by better men than you. I'm not lying, Emmett said. I'm telling you what's true. There's no woman here. Vane smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. Then you won't mind if I come back and look again, when you least expect it. I'm a patient man, Emmett. I've got the paper that says she's mine, and I've got the law in my pocket. You've got a house that's dry in a dry country, and water that runs through my fence. Let's see who wears out first. He left, and Emmett opened the pantry floor and helped Willa up out of the dark, and she was shaking, and he made her sit by the fire with a blanket, and he did not tell her what Vane had said. The next day he went to see Mabel Trask. He found her in the back of the dry goods, sorting bolts of cloth by the light of the single window, and she did not look up when he came in. He was here this morning, asking questions about you. I told him you bought flour and coffee and cloth, and that I didn't know anything about a woman. I need to know about a note, Emmett said. A man named Carden, borrowed against his farm years back. The note passed to Vane. Mabel went still, then set down the cloth and turned and looked at him a long time. Why do you need to know about that? Because I'm hiding his daughter, and I need to know what Vane actually holds. Mabel was quiet a long moment, then went to the back room and came back with a tin box. Inside were papers, yellow and folded. My husband was the banker here for 30 years. He kept a copy of every note that passed through his hands. This note was paid 5 years ago in full by the girl's mother before she died. He stamped it paid and kept the record because he didn't trust the man who bought it. Emmett read the paper twice, and the world went very quiet around him because he understood. Willa owed nothing. She never had. The debt had been a lie, and the papers she had signed were built on a lie, and the lie had been the whole of Vane's power over her. And it was sitting in a tin box in Mabel's back room, 5 years old and stamped paid. He looked up at Mabel. "Will you swear to this?" "I'll swear it in court," Mabel said. "I'll swear it on my husband's grave, and I'll enjoy every word of it. That man took my husband's bank apart piece by piece, and I have been waiting 11 years for somebody to hand me a reason to open this box." Emmett carried the paper home in his shirt and showed it to Willa, and she read it twice, and then she sat down on the floor of the kitchen very slowly and she cried, and he stood there and let her. But the paper was only truth, and truth had to be carried to the place where it counted, and that place was a court, and the court was in the county seat, and between his house and the county seat lay the whole of Garrick Vane's valley. That night a rider came up the road, not Vane but Deputy Cole, the young one who still looked at the ground when he talked. He handed Emmett a folded paper and did not meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale," he said, and rode off. The paper was a warrant. Emmett Hale was harboring a fugitive, his land and water rights attached pending a hearing, signed by Sheriff Tabor, dated for the morning. Emmett stood in the dark with the warrant in his hand, understanding that Vane had stopped being patient, that the storm was already here, and that he had one night, one road, one chance, and that the county seat was a full day's ride through a valley that belonged, every mile of it, to the man who wanted her back. He went inside and woke Willa. "Pack what you can carry. We're going to the county seat tonight, through the dark, and we're not going to stop until the sun's up and we're on the far side of the valley." She looked at him. "They'll come after us." "They will," he said. "But they'll come after us on a road they think they own, and I've been reading this ground my whole life, and there's not a mile of it I don't know better than they do." And that was the moment the storm truly began, because behind them, down the long dark road, a lamp was moving, fast, coming their way, and the only question left in that night was whether they'd reach the timberline before it reached them, and there was only one way to find out. They went out the back way, through the pasture, and the ground was kind to them, the way it is kind to a man who has spent his life learning it. Emmett led the horses down the dry creek bed where the sound would not carry, and Willa rode behind him on the old mare, and neither of them spoke, because the night was doing the speaking for them. The lamp behind them moved through the yard, stopped at the house, then moved again toward the barn, and Emmett watched it over his shoulder and kept the mare moving, slow and quiet, and he did not let himself think about what they had left behind, because thinking about it would have slowed them down. They crossed the valley floor under a moon that kept going behind the clouds, and Emmett read the ground the way he read water, by the feel of it under the horse, by the shape of the shadows, by the way the wind moved through the gaps in the hills, and he took them through places that had no road and no name, and the lamp behind them grew small and vanished, and still he did not stop. It was past midnight when they came to the old bridge over the creek, out for years, and Emmett got down and led the horses through the water, cold and up past his knees, and Willa leaned forward on the mare and did not make a sound, and when they came up the far bank he looked back and saw her face, very white in the moon, and he said, "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "Keep going." He kept going and did not ask again, because he understood that she was not fine, and that asking would have made it worse, and that the only thing he could do was get her somewhere safe and let her be not fine in private. They reached the county seat as the first gray light was coming up over the courthouse dome, and Emmett put them up at the livery, in the room above the stalls where the hostler sometimes slept, and he paid the man double to ask no questions, and he carried water up and left her alone to wash, and when he came back she had her feet up on the bed, trying to look at them, and she could not, because they were cut and blistered from 3 days of walking in boots that did not fit. He knelt down, took her foot in his hand, and said, "You walked all night on these. I didn't want to slow us down." "You'd have slowed us down more if you'd passed out," he said, not gently, because he was angry at her, and she looked at him, and then she laughed, a small surprised laugh, the first he had heard from her, and the sound of it did something to the room. He cleaned her feet and bound them with strips of the cloth he had bought in town, and he did it carefully, the way he did everything, and she watched him, and when he was done she said, "Why are you doing this?" He had asked himself the same question all night, and he had not found an answer that fit into words, and so he said, because somebody ought to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She was quiet, and then she said, my mother used to say that a person shows you who they are in the small things, when they think nobody's watching. She said, watch what a man does with his hands when he thinks he's alone. She looked at her feet, at the clean cloth at his hands. You've been showing me who you are for 3 days, and I've been too scared to look. Emmett did not know what to do with that. So he stood up, took something from his pocket, and held it out to her. It was a small thing, a brooch, silver, shaped like a bird with its wings half open, worn smooth at the edges from years of being held. It was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me the week she died, and she told me to give it to somebody who needed it more than I did, and I've been carrying it for 30 years, waiting to find out who that was. Willa took it and she turned it over in her hands, and she looked up at him, and her eyes were wet, and she said, I can't take this. It's the only thing you've got of her. You've got nothing, Emmett said. That's the difference. I've got a house and a piece of land and a lifetime of people deciding I wasn't much. You've got nothing but a lie that was told to you for 5 years. I figure the brooch is the least of what I owe you. She closed her hand around it, and she did not argue, and he was grateful for that. If you've ever been the one holding something small and knowing it meant everything, you know what that moment weighed. That's the heart of the story, and if it's found a place in you tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and a subscribe, because it's how these stories keep reaching the people who need them. He left her to sleep. He went down to the courthouse and stood on the steps in the early light, looking at the town that was about to decide the shape of the rest of her life. And he thought about the paper in his shirt and about the truth that had been sitting in Mabel's tin box for 5 years, waiting for somebody brave enough to open it. He could have told her, then, that he loved her, that he had not felt like a whole man in 3 years and she had made him feel like one again, that he wanted her to stay on his dry piece of land for the rest of their lives. It would have been true, and it would have been the wrong thing to say because she had spent 5 years being owned, and the last thing she needed was another man asking her to stay. So he did not say it. He stood on the courthouse steps in the gray light and let her be free to choose, and he did not know that she was watching from the window of the livery, and that she understood, without being told, exactly what he had not said. And that was the quietest and truest thing that happened in the whole of that long week, and it happened without a word. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock, and the courthouse was full, because everybody who had ever owed Garrick Vane money, or feared him, or watched him take something they loved, had found a reason to be in town. Vane came in at 10 minutes to 10 with Tabor behind him, and he did not look at Emmett. He stood at the front of the room, hat in hand, then turned to Willa and smiled, warm as a handshake. There she is. There's my girl. Come on home now, Willa, and we'll forget all about this. Willa did not move. She sat beside Emmett and looked at Vane. I'm not your girl. I never was. The judge was a small man with spectacles, and he looked at Vane over the top of them. Mr. Vane, you've brought a warrant and a claim. Let's hear the claim. Vane told it well, smoothly and unhurried. The ward papers, the debt, the kindness he had done the girl, and he made it sound, as he made everything sound, like the truth. He held up the ward papers. That's her signature. That's the law. She belongs to me until the debt is paid, and the debt is not paid, and I want her back. The judge looked at the papers, then at Willa. Miss Carden, do you dispute that this is your signature? It's my signature, Willa said. I signed it when I was 17 because he told me my father's debt was mine, and I was a child and I was afraid. And the debt? The debt was paid, Emmett said. The room went very quiet. Vane turned, slow, and looked at him, and the warmth left his face for the first time. What did you say? The debt was paid, Emmett said again. 5 years ago, in full, by the girl's mother, before she died. He reached into his shirt, brought out the paper, and laid it on the bench. That's the original note with the bank stamp on it, marked paid, dated 5 years ago this spring. The banker's widow kept the records, and she's here today to swear to it. The judge picked up the paper, read it twice, then looked at Vane the way a man looks at another man who has just stepped off a cliff. Mr. Vane, the judge said, this note is stamped paid. It has been paid for 5 years. The debt you are collecting does not exist. Vane stood very still. That paper's a forgery. It's the bank's own record, the judge said, and I have the widow of the banker in this room, ready to swear to it under oath. You have brought a warrant into my court based on a debt settled 5 years ago, and you have held a young woman under that false debt. I am setting aside the ward papers. I am voiding the warrant, and I am referring this matter to the county attorney. Vane looked around the room and, for the first time in his life, saw it the way it saw him. The faces of the people he had taken from, the notes he had bought, the daughters he had made small, all looking at him, none looking away. Now, the judge said, "If you have nothing further, Mr. Vane, I'd ask you to leave my courtroom." Vane left. He did not hurry because hurrying was not his way, but he left and Tabor left behind him, and the door closed, and the room let out a breath it had been holding for 20 years. The crowd came up around Willa then, the women first, then the men, touching her arm, telling her she was safe now, and she stood in the middle of it with her hand closed around the brooch, looking over their heads at Emmett, who stayed at the back of the room, because he had not earned the right to be first in line and would not take credit for what the truth had done. That was the restraint, and Mabel Trask saw it, and she came and stood beside him. "You could have taken all the credit for that." "I didn't do anything," Emmett said. "I just carried a paper." "You carried it a long way," Mabel said, "and you carried it through the dark. That counts for something, Emmett Hale, even if you're the only one who thinks it doesn't." Within a month, the papers that Garrick Vane had built his life on were being taken apart, one note at a time, and the valley began, slowly, to breathe again. Emmett went home and did not ask Willa to come with him, because she was free, and freedom meant she got to choose. She came anyway. She came on the third day, riding the old mare up the long road in the afternoon light, and got down in the yard with her hand closed around the brooch. "I've got nowhere else to go," she said, "and I've decided that's not a sad thing anymore. You've got a place here as long as you want it," he said. "And if you want to leave, I'll help you pack, and I won't ask you to stay." She looked at him a long time. "I know you won't. That's why I'm staying." And that was the whole of it, and it was enough. The garden went in that spring, the fence got mended, the roof got patched, and the spare room that had been Lena's sewing room became Willa's room. Then, in time, their room. The lavender Lena had hung to dry came down, and new lavender went up, and the house that had been a place a man went to be alone became a place a man went to be known. The valley never went back to the way it was before Garrick Vane, because nothing ever does, but it came back to something close, and the people who had watched him take learned to stop watching and start speaking. And Emmett Hale, who had spent his life being told he was not much, became, without ever once announcing it, the man the valley went to when it needed something carried. Years later, on a spring evening, Emmett sat on the porch with Willa, and the light was going gold over the valley, and she said, "Do you ever think about the day you found me?" He thought about the prince in the dry ground, the girl in the blue dress, the word all right. "I think about it every day. I think about how close I came to walking past you. You didn't walk past me." "No," he said. "I didn't. I stopped, and I looked, and that was the whole of it. Some things you don't find. They find you, and you're just the one who was standing still long enough." She smiled and took his hand, and they watched the light go, and down by the gate, the one he had never closed again, the mare stood with her head over the rail. The wind moved through the new lavender, and the valley was quiet, and it was full. And that's the story of Emmett Hale and the woman who found him standing still. If you've ever felt like the world looked right past you, I hope this one stays with you a little while. Next time, there's a story about a lighthouse keeper on a winter coast, and a message that washed up in a bottle with no name on it. Until then, keep a light on for somebody, and I'll see you in the next one.